California Inspector General for the Recovery Act. Ms. Chick is responsible for deterring and detecting fraud, waste, and abuse over $50 billion in Recovery Act funding. Prior to her appointment as Recovery IG, Ms. Chick served as Los Angeles City Controller for nearly 8 years. Before that, Ms. Chick was a City Council member for the West San Fernando Valley area. Mr. Gavin Payne serves as the Chief Deputy Superintendent of Public Instructions for the California Department of Education. State Superintendent Jack O'Connell as Chief Deputy. Mr. Payne manages all activities of the State Department of Education and oversees relationships between his department and the state school district and counties, as well as with the federal government. Prior to his present appointment, Mr. Payne worked for more than a decade as Superintendent Jack O'Connell's Chief of Staff in the California Legislature. Did I get it right? Now there's a long-standing policy that we swear all of our witnesses in. If you can stand and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, and so that's in the affirmative. I do. That the record reflects in all answers in the affirmative. You may be seated. So why don't we just go right down the line with you, Mr. Bone, and right down the line. Now, you all have 5 minutes. Unless you're a mayor. We'll come right down the line, okay?
We're announcing today.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman, and Congressman Napolitano, is that better? Can you hear me better? All right, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to come today to talk with you about the work that we've been doing on Recovery Act spending for the state of California. My comments today will just very briefly touch on the Recovery Act spending and a few of the key programs we've been following in California. These include the highway infrastructure investment, weatherization assistance, and 3 of the education programs, including the state fiscal stabilization fund. As far as the highway funds, transportation officials in the state tell us that they have obligated 100% of their $2.6 billion in funds that were apportioned to the state. The majority of these funds, about 65%, some of the mayors were indicating, are committed to pavement widening and improvement projects. Payment from the federal government for these and other highway projects comes on a reimbursable type basis. So as the contractors complete the work, then the money gets reimbursed. California has kind of lagged behind in the reimbursement. The rate is about 11%. The rest of the country is at about 25%. The transportation officials tell us that a lot of that has to do with the fact that California, about twice of their programs are administered at the local level, or twice the projects are administered at the local level as the average in the rest of the country. And that just takes a little bit longer for the approvals to happen, but they believe they're going to start to flow faster now. As far as weatherization, again, a couple points. That program is a lot smaller than, for instance, the highways. It's $186 million that's been allocated to the state, but this is a big increase in the typical funding for this program, which received only about $14 million for fiscal year '09. And you'll hear more today about the weatherization of homes in California has been delayed, largely due to efforts to comply with some of the state efforts to make sure they're complying with the prevailing wage rates and other requirements of the Recovery Act. The State Department of Community Services, which is responsible for administering this program, told us just about a week ago that they've now weatherized about 850 homes, but this is less than 2% of the 43,000 homes that they expect to weatherize with Recovery Act funds. And it's also well behind the pace that they need to maintain just to meet their upcoming quarterly goal of over 3,900 homes. In the education area, as of about mid-February, the state had dispersed to the school districts and other local education agencies about $4.7 billion in Recovery Act funds for Title I, Part A, IDEA, Part E, and the largest by far the state fiscal stabilization fund. Most of these funds are being used to retain jobs. Nonetheless, and as we've heard earlier, more than half the school districts in the state still to expect layoffs in the next school year. We and others, including the state auditor, have highlighted concerns related to the California Department of Education's cash management practices, specifically the early drawdown and distribution of Title I Recovery Act funds prior to the time the school districts were really in a position to use those funds. So what happens is there's issues with the state's compliance with federal cash management practices, as well as requiring the school districts to have to calculate and remit interest on those funds. The department has implemented a pilot program to try to correct this issue. They're piloting one small non-recovery act program right now. We want to see them develop some evaluation tools for this pilot and then expand it to some of the larger Recovery Act programs. Just one more quick area on jobs reporting. California recipients reported over 70,000 jobs on recovery.gov for the second quarterly period ending December 31. This was the largest number of jobs reported by any state for that quarter. However, the California Department of Education, which accounted for about 35,000 of those jobs, so about half, reported those jobs using the old OMB jobs reporting guidance, which was issued December 18th, 2009. So it was issued a bit late. But what that means is the jobs reporting for California was inconsistent for this quarterly period. The department does plan, though, to have the school districts revise these estimates during this open period we have right now in the federal reporting system. And then one other problem that we found with the school districts and the job reporting was that they weren't consistently collecting and reporting vendor jobs numbers. So that's another area that's going to require some additional guidance and oversight to make sure the next period is more consistent. So that concludes my comments, and I'll be happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Schultz.
Good afternoon, Chairman Towns, Chairwoman Watson, and other members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for inviting me here today to discuss the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. My name is Herb Schultz, and I'm Senior Advisor to the Governor and Director of the California Recovery Task Force. And I appreciate that the Chairman acknowledged that when we met 28 years ago, we both had hair. So it's good to see you. After this historic bill was signed, the Governor acted very swiftly, creating the California Recovery Task Force. It's made up of the best and brightest minds from our state who represent over 30 departments and agencies who work in coordination with key external stakeholders across the state to get funds out quickly and efficiently to Californians. As you saw from the first panel, the Recovery Act requires extraordinary coordination at all levels of government, and the task force works in partnership with each level, federal, state, and local, to ensure that the benefits of the dozens of programs get to organizations and individuals. We're working every day and many nights to provide unprecedented levels of transparency and ultimately get California's economy back on track. The Governor announced only a couple of weeks ago that California has funded approximately 150,000 jobs from our stimulus efforts. The task force's goal is to provide unparalleled oversight and implementation of the $85 billion expected in cash and tax benefits, the largest of any state. The task force immediately jumped into action, preparing the state for the largest infusion of federal funds that the state has experienced to date. Through the end of 2009, the end of the second quarter of reporting, $26.6 billion has been awarded to state entities, with $13.8 billion, or roughly half, being spent to extend the safety net to millions of Californians, very important, such as through Medi-Cal, food stamps, and unemployment insurance. The remaining $12.8 has been committed to contracts, grants, and loans, of which $6.3 billion has already been spent, and is out working on the street, creating jobs, job training programs, and other essential services. With the significant funding involved, Governor Schwarzenegger quickly appointed the first in the nation Recovery Act Inspector General, and we've mentioned my colleague Laura Chick to my left. The task force is working in partnership with Laura, along with the Bureau of State Audits, the State Controller's Office, the Federal Recovery Accountability and Transparency Board, OMB, and the Government Accountability Office to make sure that California's stimulus funding is spent the right way. Since the beginning, the task force members and staff have also taken action and met with numerous stakeholders in all communities to educate them and inform them of opportunities. To date, more than 45,000 people representing local government, nonprofits, energy groups, education, transit officials, healthcare stakeholders, large and small business, and local government officials have met with the task force. By coordinating efforts to put forth the most competitive applications possible, California has experienced a great deal of success in taking advantage of various discretionary opportunities. I know we've had some discussion here about high-speed rail, but the state of California has also obligated its entire 100%, $2.5 billion plus in highway programs. We've received nearly $70 million for health information technology and $30 million for healthcare jobs and job training. We put 40,000 young people to work into summer jobs, delivered more than 650,000 more meals to seniors, and we've kept in force 650 police officers providing important public safety for our communities. And as Congresswoman Chu mentioned, more than 11,000 low-income Californians have been hired by employers who were subsidized by the Recovery Act. But these big picture numbers fail to tell the story, many of the individual stories of how the Recovery Act has impacted real Californians, like Bart. Bart was laid off from his construction job and without a job for over 6 months. With little savings left and months away from losing his home, Bart went from worrying about how to feed his family to being hired. He is now working to extend State Route 905, funded in part by Recovery Act dollars, and we thank the President and the Congress for that. This is a real person, and the Recovery Act is making a real difference. Yes, there have been growing pains along the way. Several departments greatly expanded existing programs and also developed new ones. In addition, many federal guidelines have been changing throughout the life of the program. The weatherization program, for example, faced significant challenges early on, but has successfully reorganized, added key resources, streamlined contract approvals, and improved internal controls, many that were identified by our own readiness reviews and by audits undertaken by the Bureau of State Audits and the Inspector General. Today, 94% of the units are under contract, and we're working hard to get the remaining areas contracted. And I know the committee is very interested in that. To date, after the slow start, the department is on track to do approximately 4,000 homes in the first quarter and to make the goals by September 30th and throughout the life of the program. The Recovery Act also allocated a significant share of funding towards energy projects. The task force recognized early on, and it's been mentioned, that considerable changes would need to be made in order for the Recovery Act funding in energy to be successfully spent. To date, I'm happy to provide you that almost 70% of the energy program funds are now committed. While the state energy program existed prior to the Recovery Act, federal funding grew from $3 million to $226 million. The California Energy Commission also made certain, per state law, that required public input when determining program guidelines and for the awarding of grants. That ensured that the funds were distributed transparently, accountably, and equitably. In conclusion, the Recovery Act has provided individuals, businesses, nonprofits, local governments, and other key constituencies across the state important financial benefits, opportunities, jobs training, and vital safety net benefits. The task force will remain ever vigilant to ensure spending is done efficiently and quickly without sacrificing accountability and transparency. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shu, for your statement. Ms. Chick.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Towns and Chairwoman Watson, who has been one of my life role models, along with Congresswoman Napolitano and Richardson. My name is Laura Chick, and about 10 months ago, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed me to serve in the role of California's Inspector General, watching over the about $85 billion of Recovery Act dollars coming to California. The Recovery Act is designed to create jobs and get our economy moving again, but it also must be about our spending this money better than ever before. We have an opportunity to show that transparency and accountability are not just buzzwords. If we, as government, at the federal, the state, and the local level, do this right, we can go a long way to restoring the public's trust and confidence that government can actually spend their tax dollars wisely and well, and we can show them the positive and productive role that government can play in their everyday life and in their well-being. To that end, when Governor Schwarzenegger appointed me last April to oversee the spending, My mission was crystal clear, the 3 Ds. And as a social worker, Congressman Town, I know you understand the prevention part. It's to deter, detect, disclose waste, fraud, and inefficiencies. And I apologize, but I also have a category called stupid spending. The FBI has estimated that we can expect to lose somewhere between 7 to 10% in the Recovery Act funds to fraud. They quote that after the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, the rate of fraud was 17%. And I know for all of us, those are completely stunning and unacceptable figures. That is why so much of my job is about preventing fraud and preventing problems at the front end. My office brought together the U.S. attorneys, the federal inspectors general, the FBI, U.S. Department of Justice to do a comprehensive fraud awareness and prevention training up and down the state and a live webinar for over 2,000 staff and recipients handling recovery dollars. We also have issued an advisory to all recipients of recovery dollars in the state. It's a checklist of good practices to prevent fraud at the front end. And I'm going to give you a recent, real-life, unfortunate example that easily could have been prevented. Not a catastrophe, but a great lesson learned to shoot out up and down the state. A city hired a contractor for a construction project, a company they'd never used before. His bond turned out to be forged, and he skipped town after being paid for a portion of the work. But sadly, his workers were never paid. A simple phone call from the city to the bond company could have and would have prevented this from happening. It also turned out that the owner of the company had state tax liens. That's a big red flag that's called out in my advisory to try and help cities and counties and others to know what to do at the front end to stop the problems. Just this January, my office finally received audit staff to be able to go out into the detection and disclosure phases. My 2 strike teams of auditors are out in the field following recovery dollars out into our streets and neighborhoods and with subrecipients. These very expedient, in real-time focus reviews are going to give us important snapshots into how the recovery dollars are being spent right now. On Tuesday, I released my first report. It was of a local work investment board. These boards have already received and spent significant dollars across the country to help summer youth, dislocated, and adult worker programs. What we found, unfortunately, was very sloppy business and accounting practices. In fact, Basic Accounting 101 was not being followed. They had received over $3 million for the summer youth program, but had allocated $1 million of that to cover overhead, including rent. Whoops. They have run as quickly as possible behind us, that's the good news, to correct the mistakes as we were finding them, and now they have agreed to charge $60,000 appropriately for overhead and rent, and they are going to redirect the difference between the $60,000 and the $1 million to the summer youth program this upcoming summer. But that's what my office is all about. It's real-time results, not at the end when Recovery Act is over and maybe California and subrecipients will be faced with returning dollars. I'm trying to prevent that as well as others in the oversight family. In a mission to catch the problems early and correct the problems quickly and see that the dollars are being spent to create jobs, rev the economy, and show the public that we know how to spend their dollars effectively and well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement, Ms. Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, members of Congress. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the State Auditor's Office in California and talk to you a little bit about the oversight activities that my office has conducted in the last 9 months with regard to Recovery Act dollars. The programs I'm going to discuss today are the Highway Planning and Construction Program, State Fiscal Stabilization Program, Weatherization, and the State Energy Program. With regard to the Highway Planning and Construction Program, this is a program that's administered by our Department of Transportation, commonly referred to as Caltrans in California. We issued a report in December looking at their management of Recovery Act dollars in California, getting the funds out for the local projects. And we had one concern, and this was a concern that was shared by the Federal Highway Administration. And basically what the concern was is making sure that the costs that are being paid for, the reimbursements, as Ms. Calhoun talked about, the reimbursements that are being paid are for appropriate activities and are for work that has actually been completed. Subsequent to our review, the Department of Transportation has modified their practices to require engineers out at the local level representing Caltrans to confirm that the work has been done and that those invoices are appropriate and before the reimbursements take place. So we're happy with that progress. With regard to the state's fiscal stabilization program, as you're aware, significant dollars came to California with regard to this program. Our issue with this program, and Mr. Payne will be able to speak to this on behalf of the Department of Education, again, is cash management. Cash management has consistently been a concern that we've raised in previous single audits, and looking at the stabilization program, we have the same concern. $1.6 billion was advanced to school districts. In the first quarter of fiscal year 9-10, about $571 million was spent. Therefore, $1 billion is unspent, and at the school district level, that's something that, again, is a concern as far as meeting cash management responsibilities and requirements under federal regulations. The weatherization program, as again GAO indicated, this is a program that increased significantly in California, going from approximately $6 to $10 million annually to $186 million. California received authority to spend that money starting in July of 2009, but it has been delayed, both by delays at the federal level and at the state level. The delays at the federal level are with regard to Davis-Bacon. That is brand new requirement under this program, and the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage rates were not issued by the U.S. Department of Labor until September. And then there were concerns with the amounts of those rates, and they were then revised in December of 2009. So that really put the state of California kind of behind as far as being able to contract with providers. And when we were looking at the state's perspective, back in December of 2009, we only saw contracts with 8 providers in California. So again, that really does slow the process of implementing this particular program and raises concern on our part as the state tries to ramp up, that they make sure they have proper controls in place so that when they do contract providers, those providers are capable of doing the work and doing quality work. The other concern we had with regard to the weatherization program is there were 5 key geographic areas in California that had not been covered yet. Los Angeles is one of those areas. Other counties in the Bay Area as well, at that time when we issued this report, did not have providers ready and willing to participate in the weatherization program. And then the last issue area for this particular program is related to the monitoring and making sure that recipients were aware of the Davis-Bacon requirements, were complying with those requirements, and certainly making sure that the inspections were being done on a quarterly basis as is required by this particular program. So we do have some serious concerns about the Department of Community Services and the state government's ability to manage this program. The final program that I'd like to speak about is the State Energy Program. This is one that will be administered by the Energy Commission. Again, this is a program that increased substantially for our state, going from about a $3 million program to a $226 million program. And similar to the weatherization, we've been very slow to implement this program. In fact, when we completed our audit in December, the state had only awarded 2 contracts, one to the Department of General Services, which is a state entity that works with state agencies as far as buildings. The purpose of that was for retrofitting buildings, providing energy efficiency measures. The other award was, or contract was, with the Employment Development Department, and that was for green jobs, to provide job training to people for energy efficiency type projects. So we're very concerned about this program, particularly because the funds have to be fully obligated by September 30th of this year. So again, we made recommendations to this entity and the administration to really strengthen their controls, strengthen their management practices, and put some resources towards this particular program. With that, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your statement, Mr. Payne.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairwoman, Congresswoman Napolitano, Congressman Richardson, it's a delight to be here today. I bring you greetings from State Superintendent Jack O'Connell, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and remembers many of you fondly, having served with you in Sacramento. We're grateful to Congress and the President for providing these funds. Let me repeat that. We are grateful, very grateful, for the Congress and the President for having supplied states with stimulus funds. They've truly been a lifeline, especially for California school districts in the current fiscal crisis. And let me give you a little context too. When the stimulus money first came out, the superintendent working with the governor very consciously made a decision to shift that money from Sacramento to school districts as quickly as possible, knowing that the accountability and the follow-up would lag from that. But it was a conscious decision made at the time, taking full advantage of the opportunity afforded by Congress and the President, and I would say, at least for our part and the governor's part, loudly applauded by ourselves and often praised the President and Congress in that activity. Let me give you a little bit of the picture of what we've got. Federal funds from stimulus money supply about 6 major federal programs and a number of smaller ones. Under ARA, we've received thus far 9 grants, including one in which we administer the kindergarten through grade 12 portion on behalf of the governor's office. That's the SFSF. All these grants total about $6 billion, as was talked about. For these 9 grants, we've issued 3,800 subgrants to 1,800 subrecipients, which are primarily school districts, charter schools, and county offices of education. So in the second quarter, as you've heard, those subrecipients reported creating or retaining about 34,000 jobs in K-12 alone, and another 4,000 or 5,000 in higher education. This is the largest volume of subrecipients and subgrants, I think, among our fellow state agencies in California, and possibly the largest among state agencies nationwide. As I said, the decision was made to ship early and follow along with collecting data. For most of the education programs, the funds were part of existing existing federal programs, and the normal data collections happen in our normal monitoring process. And so we knew that we had the mechanisms in place to monitor those funds and to go forward with that. And the existing federal guidelines govern all of those. The one difference being, of course, the State Fiscal Stabilization Fund, for which there are a few guidelines, and for which, or which has been the primary lifeline that has gone to school districts. Section 1512 reporting is an issue of concern to the committee. It now requires reporting quarterly from recipients and subrecipients, among other things, the amount of funds awarded, the expenditures, the number of jobs saved or created as a result of ARA. To comply with this, we created a fairly quick and easy and good web-based system for collecting data from the districts. We issued a number of guidances and had webinars all over the state. We did that at least half a dozen times, if not more, with districts and states. We had great participation by those districts so that they were knowing what was going to be expected of them. And I think to date our reporting effort has been successful. 99% of our subrecipients have submitted data for the quarterly reports required by the Act. An issue, of course, as you've heard about, has been the calculation of jobs figures. And those figures have lagged. We made a call at the Department of Education after the December 18th guidance came out, indicating the new methodology, which frankly we like, and it's much simpler to deal with. The new methodology that came out from OMB came in December 18th. The superintendent's call at that point was to frankly not require districts to comply immediately, and there are a number of factors for that. And of course, the guidance itself allowed for that fact. It didn't have to be done immediately. Most of what it was sort of real and on the ground. On December 18th, many school districts already shut down for the break, for the holidays. Most of them, or many of them, shut down literally, and as a means of saving money in their already strapped budgets. At the same time, just to give you a little more context, we were trying to collect from, or trying to engage those districts at the same time in embracing with us an attempt to apply for Race to the Top funds. And so that was a very complicated period in their time, using a lot of their staff resources. And also, the question for us is one of always reliability. And if the choice for us is the reliability of the data or the timing of the data, we will often opt for the reliability so that we don't report jobs numbers that could be incorrect. And so for those 3 reasons mainly, we opted to issue the guidance around that December 18th memo and the new methodology early in January. And in fact, those districts are going back and completing that data now. And as I sort of noted earlier, even when OMB released its guidance, it said to give every effort and did not require that reporting to be done immediately. Questions about administration and oversight. We're quite proud of working with the governor's office and the superintendent with the job we've done in administering these funds, given the current budget crisis in the state of California. We've gotten plenty of documents out, we've administered funds well, and we've administered funds quickly. Well, there was mention made of cash management. It is a long-standing issue that we have been dealing with very earnestly. We have been working with the U.S. Department of Education quite actively on a pilot program to get our arms around cash management. We have been modifying our monitoring processes on other programs to comply. And we feel very confident that those systems will change and improve quite substantially this year and next year as we go. The other piece of that puzzle is interest reimbursements from districts back to the state. We have been very active, and of course those reimbursements come back to the federal government. We've been very active in that with school districts and have been monitoring that quite closely as well. Recognizing that I'm almost at the time, I want to reiterate the thank you. Reiterate the fact that in the context of the time, you were the only people standing in the way, and the money from the federal government was the only people standing in the way of substantial layoff notices. And even with, unfortunately, federal money, there were 26,000 of those layoff notices issued last March. Fortunately, many of those folks were retained ultimately. We're expecting another 20,000 of those layoff notices to be issued this year, same thing, but we're ever hopeful that we can find resources to make that good and make those layoffs not actually happen as the school year begins.
All right.
Again,